Yo class, welcome back. So right now in our app, we are loading all of the posts in the homepage and showing them. Right now it's okay because we only have about 20 posts, but obviously this is not ideal because we could have thousands of posts and we don't want to fetch them all at once and show them. So we could introduce some sort of pagination. We could do pages and show page 1, 2, whatever, but this is not the 90s anymore. Let's do something more modern, which is like infinite scrolling, which happens to be what Reddit does as well. So this goes to as an extra point to cloning Reddit. Let's go back to VS Code and let's open post.ts, the routes file. And here at the top of the get post handler, I'm going to add two new variables. So the first one will be called current page. And this is exactly that. We could have a default value for this, or we could also take it from the query strings that are provided in the request. So I'm going to give this a type of number. And I'm going to give this a value. So I'm going to say here, between parentheses, request.query, because it's in the query strings, .page. And by the way, we need to bring back this request because we need it now. And here I'm going to say or 0. So if this does not exist, if it's undefined, it's going to default back to 0. And I'm going to say as number to cast it to number because it could read this as a string, even though it's actually given as a number. And I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to create another one, which we might not necessarily use, but you could use in different implementations. I'm going to call this posts per page. And this will represent the number of items that we will have per page. So if we look at our app, we have roughly, let's see, we have around 8 in our site, right? So I'm going to set this to have the value that we get from request.query.count, or it's going to be 8 by default. So now the way we're going to paginate, it's simple. So inside of this post.find, we're going to say skip so that it skips a number of items. Oops, let me fix this. And the number of items will be current page times posts per page. Because if we're on page 3, you want to skip, let's say 2 times 8, which is 16, and then get the rest from that point. But here we also want to say take posts per page. We want to take the exact amount of posts per page. So an example, if page is 0, it's going to skip 0 times 8, so it's not going to skip anything, and it's going to take posts per page, which is 8, so it's going to take the first 8. And then if it's 1, it's going to skip 8 and then take 8 and so on. So we are now done on the server side. Let's go to our index.tsx on the client side, where we have the post on the home page. And here, first thing I want to do is I want to implement the mechanism that allows us to detect that the user has scrolled to the bottom of the page. By the way, do you see we already have only 8 posts here, which is pretty cool. But obviously, we need to make it so that it loads more as we scroll down. So we're going to use something called intersection API, which is a simple way for us to detect whether a div is in sight or out of sight, or we are scrolling into it or out of it. So the idea is that we need to track, let's say in this example here, this bottom post here. And when we get to the bottom of it right here, we want to load more. And then as we load more, we want to track the new bottom one. And then when we reach the bottom of that one, we need to load more posts. So let's set this up. So first thing I want to do is here in the homepage where we get the posts, we are fetching the posts and then we are looping through them and creating these postcards. And we want to track the bottom one. So there's multiple ways of tracking it. I'm going to track it with a good old ID. So let's open the postcard component. And here at the top where we have this div, I'm just going to add an ID to it, an ID. And that ID will just be the identifier because that's unique. So save that. Let's go back to postcard or to index.tsx. So here, first thing I want to create a state variable. So let's use state, and this will be, I'll call it observed post. This will start as an empty string, and let's import useState from, oops, not this shortcut, useState from React, and this will keep track of the current observed post. So now I'm going to use useEffect, so use effect, and here what I want to do is initially I want to check first of all if posts is falsy, so if there are no posts, or post.length equals 0. If there are no posts or we have no posts at all, then we're just going to return because we're not going to track any post. Otherwise, we're going to say const ID, and now we need to get the ID of the bottom post, which is posts. So we're going to access posts.length -1, which gives us access to the last one. And we're going to say .identifier. And now we're going to do a check. We're going to say if ID does not equal observed post. So if this is a new one, then we're going to actually track this one. Now we don't have the tracking mechanism yet. We're going to simply say set observed post to this new one because it has changed. And here for the array of dependencies, we're going to add posts because every time post changes, we want to run this again. So I'm going to create another function here. So const observe element. I call it observe element because you can use this to observe anything, not just a post div. So here, this takes an element of type HTML element and it does something. So I want to do a first check because sometimes you get an element and then you get the ID of it, but it might not have been rendered on the DOM yet. So I'm going to do a safety check, say if not element. So if it's undefined or null at the beginning, we're just going to return. Otherwise, we're going to say const observer equals new intersection observer. And this is from the intersection API. And this takes two things, a callback, which has entries, and you could think of entries are points on the div itself, but we're just going to track one point. So we're going to say if entries 0 dot is intersecting equals true, then do what we need to do at the end of the intersection when this happens. So actually let's console log something, and we're going to say reached bottom of post. And we're also going to say observer, and this is why I put it in a variable because we need to access it, dot unobserve element. And we haven't started observing it. We need to say observer dot observe, and we pass it that element. This is slightly confusing because this is inside of here, but it's simple. We just create an observer, and don't worry about this. This only happens when the intersection happens. And we say observer.observe. We observe that element, which is the bottom post, and then the callback to when the bottom of the intersection point or the bottom intersection point is intersecting with the edge of our viewport. It's going to call this and it's going to console log and it's going to unobserve that element because we don't need to track it again, because if we do, then every time we reach any of these bottom ones, it's going to actually trigger this fetching more posts. If this is a bit confusing, don't worry. It was confusing for me the first time as well. It's not a very intuitive thing to work with. After entries, I forgot to add some options, and for options, we're just going to say threshold and we're going to give 1. And this basically is a value from 0 to 1. 0 is the top and 1 is the bottom. So we just need to do 1 because we need to track the bottom. Now we need to call this observe element, and we're going to call it here when the observed post changes. So we're going to say observe element, and we're going to observe document.get element by ID, and we're going to observe this ID that has changed. And it's better not to use observed post here because it might not have changed yet. So let's see if this is working. So save. So now I'm just going to refresh, open the DevTools on the console. And so if we scroll down, there we go. We reach bottom of post. And this is the post that we're tracking in right now. So now we need to, when we reach the bottom of post, we need to fetch more posts. So SWR has a really cool helper to do that. And if we scroll down in the documentation, you go to infinite loading. You see there is this use SWR infinite hook that allows us to do exactly that. So here they show this example where you have this, you put a Git repo, a package, and then it loads you issues for that package and puts kind of the titles of them here. And as you click load more here, it loads more. And for our example, instead of clicking a button, it actually triggers when we reach the bottom of the page, which we already implemented. So we just need to implement the rest of this. So I'm actually just going to copy this from here, this use infinite scrolling or SWR infinite call, and paste it here. Let's import this from SWR and let's replace this. So we need to fetch slash posts, which just slash post here. And let's say question mark and say page equals. Now the page is actually given to us here, which is the size that starts with 0. So I'm actually going to give this a name of page, and this set size, give it a name of set page so that it kind of makes more sense in our code. And then give this page right here and remove the rest of this string. Just delete that. And we don't need to give it a fetcher because we already set up a default one in the app.tsx. So remove that. And actually, I made a mistake. This should be the index. This should be the index that is given here. The page is used somewhere else. Now, this data that we get here actually contains an array of our data. So if we give this right here, if we give this a type of post array like we have up here, it's, if you hover over the data, you'll see that it's post array. So we need to get the first element of that post or whatever elements are in there. So they already give us a cool way of doing that here. So here we say const issues equals that. I'm actually gonna grab these two as well. So copy that and paste them here. Actually makes more sense to paste them after. So here, instead of issues, we're gonna say posts. And this will be, if we have data, we're going to concatenate it with an empty array. Otherwise, it's an empty array. And let's comment this out because we're not going to use this anymore. So here we're going to have our posts. And also there's this loading boolean that we can use to change the state of our UI. And we can give this a type of post array. So this alone, if we save, it should still do the same and fetch the first 8. But the only difference is now we need to trigger. So for example, here where they use the button. So right here. Where is that button? Yeah, so this button load more just sets the size to, actually not this one, this is the initial load. Where is it? Yeah, this one. So this one, when you click it, it sets the size to size +1, which is just the page, just increments the page in our case. So for us, it's not the button, like I said, it's the reaching the bottom of the post. So that will be inside of here where we reach the bottom. We're just going to say set page to page +1. Now save this. And if we go back to our app, we refresh. Let's look at the network tab. We see XHR. So here we have a request to page equals 0 where we get our initial 8 posts. And now if we scroll down, there we go. You see the bar became smaller. And for some reason, I don't see the other request here. Okay, let me check again. So I'm just going to refresh. We get page equals 0. We scroll down. There we go. We request page equals 1. And we have more. And now the next one should be around here. Yeah, we reached the bottom of it. We request page equals 2, which gives us, I think, a couple of more, like, 3 more. And if we scroll now down, we don't request anymore because as we request page equals 3, we get an empty array and this is not tracked anymore. So there's nothing tracked. We know that we have reached the bottom. So our code knows, because if this ID, right, where are we? Yeah, right here. If this ID does not change, we don't track any new posts. We know that we already fetched the bottom, fetched the latest posts. Actually, one thing that I almost forgot is we could use this as loading initial data to show a piece of text that says loading, similar to the piece of text. Actually, I'm going to get the exact same styling from the subpage where we show when there's no posts. That should be around here. Yeah, this text LG, I'm just going to copy this, text LG text center. So we could go, actually, I think we don't even need this as loading initial data because this is kind of like unreliable because beyond the first load, it's not going to be true at all. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get rid of it because we already have is validating, which is true whenever we're fetching data, which is exactly what we need. So we could go right. Where are we? Yeah, so these are the posts, right? So I want to show here at the top loading when we are initially loading. So we're going to say if, well, actually I forgot to put is validating at the start. So if is validating and we put this. So of course, instead of saying no post submitted, we're going to say loading ... And then what we could do to differentiate between the first load and the preceding or the ones that come after, we could just say if is validating and post dot, actually we need to put an and posts dot length, length is bigger than 0, then we show loading more, let's say. So save that. And now if we go back, if we refresh, we briefly get loading for like a fraction of a second. And if we scroll down, I know for a fact we do get loading more, but we don't see it because of how fast it loads them, but it is there anyway. One other thing I noticed is that the vote buttons are broken on the actual post cards, as opposed to the ones on the actual post page. They're not broken, they're working because we didn't update the logic there. So obviously when we're not logged in, we want them to redirect to the login page. And when we're logged in, we want them to work properly. So first thing is, let's go to the post card. So actually here we need to get authenticated. So right here at the top, we can say const destructure authenticated. from use auth state, and then scroll down. Actually, don't scroll down, just here in the vote function, we're going to say if not authenticated, then router, which reminds me we need router, so let's say const router equals use router, and make sure to import that from next. So here, if not authenticated, router.push slash login. And also, yeah, okay, let's test this. So obviously if we upvote, there we go, we go to the login. Let me log in, John, 1 through 6. And here, yeah, it's broken here because it's not revalidating the data. So a simple solution to this would be here in the use, where are we? Use infinite SWR or SWR infinite, we can get revalidate here as well. And then we can pass it to the posts. So here for each post card, we can pass a revalidate equals revalidate. And we need to add this as a prop. So let's go to post card and here add a revalidate. And that's optional because we might not get it from other places. And this is of type function. And here where we vote, we're going to check actually after we send the vote and it's successful, we're going to say if revalidate, then call revalidate. Did I misspell it? Why is it hard to spell revalidate? Let me check. Revalidate. Oh, okay, I forgot to destructure it from the props. Okay, so here add it to the destructured props. And also one other thing that we need to update about the logic here is that when we have the same vote as we did before, so we're going to say if vote equals user vote, and then set the value, actually not vote, value, and set the value to 0. All right, save this, actually save the index as well, and refresh. I don't know, I'm refreshing, I need to get rid of that habit. Okay, so another unfunny post, if we vote the same, that should, cool, it does revalidate and it removes the vote, and then here as well. The only thing we could do something about detecting when the initial data has been loaded so that when it revalidates, we don't get to see the loading again. I think this is a problem that is specific to the use SWR infinite, because with the other ones, I don't see it happening. So yeah. All right, that's it for this one. Please do make sure to like this video if you learned something, or even if you were entertained by my silly humor or whatever. And of course, dislike it if you disliked it, but please do let me know in the comment section what you disliked about it. And of course, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Come on, subscribe. Enter the class and become the 10x developer that you always wanted to be. All right, so that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Cheers.